Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it's the Wrestling Chatter. I'm Jack Farmer, and this is George Hermoza. And today we have an incredible episode for you where we get to chat with none other than the voice of WCW and TNA, David Penzer. We chat all about his time in pro wrestling and, of course, his new book. George, this was a good one.
Yeah, I mentioned in an interview too, where growing up in the Nitro era, I know more David Penzer than Gary Michael Cappetta, who obviously was a mainstay on, I guess, Crockett Promotions in the '80s. But David Penzer was my guy. He was the Howard Finkel to WCW, and yeah, I mentioned it to him in the interview, and I'm happy that we were able to talk to him.
We talk about what he did when he first started. We talk about Michael Buffer. We talk about how he got along with guys like Tony Schiavone and what was going on when Shockmaster fell through the wall. We even talk about cummerbunds. Everyone, it's a good show. Stick around. We'll see you right there and then. You know, we have a guest here, and I'm put in a tough spot. I'm put in a very tough position here because I'm supposed to introduce somebody who is one of the very best at all time of introducing people, George. We're being joined now by David Penzer, famous WCW TNA ring announcer. David Penzer, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
You guys are too kind. Thank you very much for having me. And I don't know about famous, but infamous maybe.
Look, all type of fame is good from what I hear, right? All press is good press. Is that what they say? Thank you for joining us. Of course, you're joining us.
That's what they say.
You got a book out, David Penzer, one that came out recently, Sitting Ringside, Volume 1, available at davidpenzerbook.com. One I'm very excited to read, and I'm very excited to chat with you as well because pull back the curtain a little bit. I do some ring announcing here in Southern California for pro wrestling and MMA, and so I want to pick your brain. But before we do, I want to talk to you about the book. I want to talk to you about the very beginning of the book, the foreword, written by Kevin Sullivan. I got to ask, why Kevin Sullivan? How did that happen? What about Kevin Sullivan made you think he's the right guy to write the foreword for my book?
Well, Kevin's a dear friend. It was almost meant to be. The first wrestling match I ever attended live was on in May of 1977 at the Fort Lauderdale National Guard Armory. And it was a semi-main event, and Mike Graham and Kevin Sullivan teamed up in the semi-main. And so, you know, the first show I ever went to, Kevin Sullivan's wrestling, and then I get into the business, and Kevin takes me under his wing, and, you know, and we become friends, and, you know, we've stayed friends, and he's very vital to that WCW story, and he's very vital to my story. So I think I didn't think of anybody else. Really, I thought it was the perfect person.
In the foreword, Kevin Sullivan says, David grew up in the business the hard way. What do you think he meant by that?
Well, I've said before, it was improbable to impossible that I was going to get where I got. Looking back in the 1990s, in the year 1990, they just didn't let you in the back if you weren't a wrestler or you know, in the office or a referee. It just didn't happen. I just got incredibly lucky that a couple of people gave me opportunities that really back then didn't happen. So, you know, it was improbable for sure. But I was able to get in and been on the ride for 30 years. So I'm blessed beyond belief.
What is it that got you hooked in wanting to be in pro wrestling? It's one thing to be a fan. It's another thing to actually be in the sport of pro wrestling. What was something that convinced you from wanting to be a fan to wanting to be within the business?
I don't know if I ever consciously made a decision. A slight door opened up for me, as described in the book. And so I you know, what got me into the business is when I was 11 years old, my cousin was staying with us, and he said, "Hey, let's turn on wrestling. Saturday, 12 noon on Channel 6, Gordon Soley Championship Wrestling from Florida." And I said, "What's wrestling?" And he said, "Watch this. You're going to love this." And I was hooked. Superstar Billy Graham and Dusty Rhodes, two of the most charismatic people in the entire history of the business. They were feuding on top, and Gordon Soley was doing his Gordon Soley, man. And I was hooked. And I was saying this yesterday to somebody, you know, it seems silly now because we could DVR stuff. We could watch video on demand. We could watch it on YouTube or Daily Motion or whatever. You choose pick your poison. Back then I had to make sure I was home every Saturday at noon, until the DVR was invented, which took a long time. So, if you missed it, there was no other way to see it. And I don't know that I missed very many over a multi-year period. And I was obsessed. I was hooked. I got all the magazines. Later on, I started booking my own territory in my head. I don't know that I ever consciously said this is what I want to do, but when that door cracked open just a little bit, I said, why the hell not? What's the worst that could happen? They slam it in your face. Luckily, they didn't.
Well, you talk a little bit about it in the book where you talk about how you were a stooge for a while and Dusty Rhodes didn't pay much attention to you, but eventually was saying things like you could be the next play-by-play guy. Talk to me a little bit about what you mean by you were a stooge, and talk to me a bit about when it clicked for you that joining the broadcast team looked like the way of the future for you. Well,
when I say stooge, I mean, when I first got the job, I wasn't the ring announcer. I wasn't even doing anything. I was just driving guys up from Florida to enhancement guys. They were paying me a $25 booking fee, which was common back then in the industry. Usually it was the wrestlers that would bring enhancement guys. So Rip Rogers out of Kentucky, Louisville, or like George South out of North Carolina. But they would also wrestle and get the booking fee. And WCW would pay for their van and their gas. So I was just coming up and, I figured that I only had one shot at this. So I was going to volunteer to do as much as they needed me to do. You want a cup of coffee? I'm going to get you a cup of coffee. You need me to take out the trash? I'm going to take out the trash. Run guys for interviews? Done. Sign in guys? Done. Ring the bell? Done. Anything I could. And, so that seemed to work. When I first got there, nobody would really, other than I hung out with the enhancement guys I brought up and, none of the big names. I didn't try to go up to them because I knew that wasn't smart. And they certainly didn't come up to me and introduce themselves. And it took a while for me to gain their trust. And might sound silly now, but it was a different business back then than it is now. And little by little, they started, the boys started, asking me, what the hell are you doing up here every week? And, Junkyard Dog named me Walking Man because I just walked around, stooging around, doing all the jobs that I had offered to do. Later on, I got the ring announcing opportunity. I think the Dusty thing, to get back to your original question, was more of a rib on Schiavone than it was on a compliment of me. And I think I said that on the book. But I did do, for about 6 months, I did do play-by-play with Larry Zbyszko as color commentator for the European Nitro, which was a syndicated show to Europe, which aired a week after Nitro aired. So when I'd come back from Nitro and Thunder, I'd voice that over on like a Thursday. I had to call myself a different name because at points I was pitching to myself. So they couldn't know that David Penzer was, let's go down to David. I'm David Penzer. Let's go down to David Penzer in the ring. So, but I don't know if that would have ever happened. I did it a little bit. I'm not saying I was great at it. I had to do it by myself back then. I would have lasted a week, but Zbyszko carried me, thank God, which I'll always appreciate. And you never know what would have happened down the road. But again, I think that was more of a wink and a nod just to mess with Schiavone than it was to put me over.
It does seem like a lot, just kind of hearing you talk. It looks like a little bit of a blueprint on maybe how to not just breaking into the business, but what you do once you're in the business. Did you kind of notice that when you were writing it in terms of like, wow, like this is what a lot of people should be doing, not to say like maybe it's to the point of a stooge, or maybe it is, but just something to kind of like, listen, you got to pay your dues. If you got a veteran asking you for something, you got to go do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot easier now to get that crack in the door, for sure. But yeah, you got to show respect, especially to the promoter, especially to the top talent. That'll get you far, especially if you're not another wrestler. If you're a ring announcer or referee or production or whatever it is that you do. And yeah, it's a business of respect, and respect is, I'm not saying you have to kiss their ass. I'm not saying, you got to, bring them, 2 lottery tickets every time you see them and say, hey, I hope you win, $1 million. But, hey, my name is Phil, my name is David. I'm new. I want to get, I want to get my foot in the door even more and learn this business. And if there's anything I could ever learn from you or do for you, no matter how small, I'm happy to do it. And yeah, that goes a long way. There's a fine line between kissing ass and being respectful. I don't know if I don't know which line I was on, but there still is that line.
What I love about this book is there are so many interesting stories about different people from your perspective. And one of them, and one of the things you talked about, one of the people you worked with was Tony Schiavone, who you've mentioned already. And you said that he was a mentor to you and really helped you work in production and things like that. Can you talk to me a bit about what Tony Schiavone specifically taught you while he was working with you and what he did as a mentor to help you grow?
He taught me, about how to handle yourself in certain situations, but I don't know if he actually taught me anything. But by letting me be involved in production, he allowed me to learn another trade of this craft I was doing, and which was great because as a ring announcer, you never know when the boss's nephew wants the job and he could talk on a microphone. So when I went in there, I didn't ask for any more money. I just asked for opportunity to learn as many different things as I could, because I figured the more things I knew, the harder it would be to give me a pink slip. Later, again, Tony, when you're living on the road like that, you're as much family as the family you go home to. So, you get to know each other in an intimate way, as far as, you talk about your families and your problems and your issues. And, you're closer to some people than others, obviously. But Tony was a good friend and he was a boss. So, he was always, it was always guiding me in the right direction, giving me ideas, giving me feedback, or I could go to him for feedback. So it's really a family atmosphere in the wrestling business. Even as recently as my stint with Impact Wrestling that ended at the end of the year, it's still family back there, and you still you got your regular family at home, and you got your wrestling family, and sometimes you care about your wrestling family more than your regular family. But I'm half kidding and I'm half serious, but yeah, so yeah, you just get to know people, and some, like I said, some on a closer basis than others. I'm not going to tell you that me and Trey Miguel were like, buddy, and we used to talk about, world's issues and stuff. But, there was guys there that I did get to know, Alex Shelley, Sabin, Diener, Cody Diener, Khan, that I did, that I did, have that bond with, we could talk about whatever. And so, you gravitate to people who are most like you, I guess, in your personality, or maybe different from you. I don't know. I never really thought about it, quite frankly. It's a pretty good question.
So I started watching wrestling, 90s and whatnot, and obviously the Nitro era was a big deal. And you were kind of the voice of WCW, to the point where I remember more you as the voice of WCW as opposed to Gary Michael Cappetta, who, upon doing research on the network, years ago, I'm like, man, this guy was a pretty big deal. So what was it like, or what kind of pressure did you have replacing Gary Michael Cappetta? And what advice would you have for maybe people in the future having to replace such a legend like a Capetta?
Well, I got lucky because Gary left. I wasn't lucky he left. He left on his own volition. He kept telling me he was going to leave, and I kept saying, no, you're not. At the last minute, they'll sign you back, and he's like, you don't understand. I don't want to come back. And, so I got, I happened to be there in the Monday Night Wars era, the whole entire thing from the beginning to the end, never missed a night show, never missed a Thunder. So I was that he was that constant when there was 1.5 million fans watching every week. I was that constant when there was 10 million fans watching every week, if you combine all the people watching the different shows. So I just had a much broader platform, but you just have to take the opportunities. If Gary never left, he would have been and I still hopefully would have been backup ring announcer, and I still would have had a great story to tell. Maybe not a book to write, but everything in life happens for a reason. So I'm not sure that answered your question. If not, I apologize.
Yeah, I got to ask you about one of my favorite things about you. So I was a WCW fan until the very end. We talked about the Monday Night Wars. I was team WCW all the way through. So I was always a big fan of yours. I have to ask, though, I need to know your inspiration behind the cummerbunds and the bow ties, the fashion choice there. Why did you choose that particular look, and why did you stop using them?
If Ric Flair is in a certain mood, he could wear red tights, red boots, and a white robe. He could wear, if he's in a different mood, he could wear, green tights, green boots, and a yellow robe. I wore a tuxedo, and my way to show my personality, how I was feeling that day, was just I would take 4 or 5 cummerbund and bow tie sets on the road with me. I never pre-planned anything. When I got to the building, I'd look at what I had and I'd say, this is, I feel like wearing this tonight. And I guess I wasn't purposely doing it to stand out. But I guess it did. I guess it happened that way for sure. But why I stopped after WCW went out of business, I decided to not wear them anymore. I did wear a couple on Impact pay-per-views because Twitter had sort of said, hey, I said to Twitter, should I bring it back, for one time? And people on Twitter liked it. So, but yeah, I just thought that was that era, and I didn't know what the future was going to lie. In the XWF, I had Sandra Gray, who made the costumes, who's gone on and worked for every major company in the world. God bless her, wonderful woman. And she just took a black cummerbund and she put the XWF logo on it. So I was wearing that black cummerbund and a black bow tie. And when I went to TNA, I just figured, that was the past, and I'm going to start now, and I'm going to do differently. So maybe it was because I wasn't on the road as much. So I, didn't feel the need to have to change it up as much. But when you're on the road 25 days a month, you don't want to be wearing black every day.
No, absolutely. And I want to talk to you about the team you got to work with, because one of my favorite parts of the book, like I said before, is some of the incredible personalities that you got to work with and your perspective of them. And someone I want to ask you about is Mean Gene Okerlund. I think that if you ask most wrestling fans, at least some of us who have been watching for a while, who the greatest wrestling interviewer of all time is, it would be a unanimous Mean Gene Okerlund. What did you see from Mean Gene that made him stand out to be head and shoulders the person we all look to as the greatest interviewer of all time? At least in my opinion. Of course, younger people who maybe didn't get the chance to see him may feel differently, but Mean Gene, what made him special in your opinion?
Definitely the greatest of all time. Nobody's even close. Just like Howard Finkel's the greatest ring announcer of all time. Nobody's even close. In my opinion, at least. People could disagree. Gene was he's so great at what he did. I mean, it came naturally to him. Now, I know he had done it for a while in the AWA and WWF, but he was so natural. His personality that you see in those interviews was his real personality, and he could carry anything and be entertaining about it. And he was a funny guy, had a great sense of humor. He picked up little things like, I can't wait to go, he'd do like a market specific promo. I can't wait to go back to Toronto, Canada to see my longtime close personal friend. And it wasn't a real person. He was was his shtick, and his shtick was so great. and he was so good at doing it and comfortable at doing it. He was the best of all time, and it's an honor. It was an honor to get to know him and call him my friend.
Speaking of Mean Gene, did you ever get a chance of trying a Mean Gene's burgers back in the day?
I did not, but I had a Mean Gene Burgers T-shirt at one point. I did sell it on eBay, I think. But he was passing out T-shirts one time. I never did get a chance to get a burger. We never went to a city. There was only a few of them at that point. But I wish I would have. Burger that says "bite me," right?
I believe so. I mean, there was one actually on my college campus. One of my biggest regrets is he actually had a signing at the Mean Gene's Burgers on my college campus, and for whatever reason, I didn't stop in and say hello. One of my biggest regrets in life.
Well, it's easy to do that. There's a lot of regrets that I have, especially taking photos. But back then, I didn't want to look like, I was standing next to Andre the Giant in his Prince Bride outfit, which was like my favorite movie. And, Andre the Giant was Andre the Giant. You don't have to say anymore. And I didn't, somebody said, "Do you want a picture?" And I was like, no, because I didn't want to look like a mark. This was early on in my tenure. I was a mark, quite frankly. And I didn't want murmurs to go, hey, he's just here to meet people. And so I didn't take as many pictures and have as many conversations as I could have, I guess. But, you always have to, I tried to lay low, man. If you don't, if you're just saying hi to somebody, how are you? There's no way they could interpret that as like being disrespectful or being, rude and getting pissed about it. So if somebody talked to me, I engaged, but I just try to be respectful and lay low. And, I have a lot of regrets as well, but you got to move on with life. So, just next time somebody's signing books in your town, be sure to go check them out if there's somebody you're interested in, for sure. But I understand that is my point wholeheartedly.
Totally understandable as well. And I agree. Get the pictures if you can. I have a question, and I want to make sure I'm being respectful about it, but it's something that I've always been curious about. Is you were, as George says, I agree, in many ways, the voice of WCW. And I used to always say, I feel like you had the best job in the world because I used to pay to go to these shows. You were getting paid to go to the shows, and you got a front row seat. How cool is that? But there were events where Michael Buffer would come in and he would ring announce the main event. How did you feel about that? Was there a little bit of jealousy? Were you upset? Why is this guy coming in doing my job? Were you excited because he was a big name? How did that play out with Michael Buffer?
Absolutely no, wasn't upset at all. It's funny how many people bring that up. I never thought twice about it. I came up with a line. It's called capitalism, and I believe in it tremendously, and it helped me tremendously. I just didn't think of a great line. So instead of making $100 million, I made, $50,000. But no, I mean, he came up with a great line. It got people, really excited and for the main event. And, that's how the world works. People have invented silly things and become rich off of them. And I'm not saying that it was a silly line. It was a great line. But no, he always showed me respect. He became a friend, although we lost touch, obviously. And I never had a problem with it at all. Again, I was just happy to be there, man. It's not my place. If management wants Michael Buffer to do the main event and they want to pay him $10,000, God bless him. I'm still there. As long as I'm still here, I only care about me. And I don't mean to say that selfishly, but I'm saying as far as, I can't worry about what other people are getting paid and stuff. I can only worry about my life.
I love that answer. And you talked about the line that obviously made Michael Buffer famous. And there are a lot of things that different ring announcers can do. I've heard you speak on Samantha Irvin before and how incredible she is. What do you think makes someone stand out as a ring announcer? What makes the best ring announcers the best?
I think like with Samantha Irvin, when you have a passion for it, when you feel a genuine emotion for it, when you're not just, even though you're reading off a card, you're not just reading off a card. When Randy Savage used to come out with Pomp and Circumstance, which was my favorite wrestling entrance of all time, even before I worked with him, that little kid in me would still get excited when I heard that music. you have to love what you're doing, and people will realize you love what you're doing. And if you don't, they'll realize you don't. And you might love it, but you might not have that emotion. There's a way you have to learn to tune into your emotion, and let the people know you're excited, because if you're excited, then they're excited even more. So that's all I could say about that. I wish I had a perfect answer, but I just think it's emotion that sinks through. And Samantha Irvin, God bless her, certainly has that in different ways than I've ever seen before in this business.
For the people who are looking to get into ring announcing or broadcasting in pro wrestling in general, do you have any advice for them? Because, of course, there's so many talented individuals right now, and there are only so many places. And unlike in sports or situations where people are there for a certain amount of time, in wrestling, JR, he's still on the commentary team in places. Do you have advice for people who are trying to get into the business and how they can do it as a ring announcer or as a commentary person, interviewer, broadcaster, etc.?
Just if you get that foot in the door, man, like I said earlier, be respectful, be polite, ask people what they think, what you could do differently, what they think you did well. Humble as hell. And, and again, there's a fine line between kissing ass and being respectful. Mine was probably crossing the line of kissing ass, but you don't have to do that. It's a different world. This is 25, 30 years later, and a lot's changed. Not to say it was bad back then. It was just different, not good or bad or better or worse, but, just don't ever get full of yourself. Don't ever, don't ever, always respect the top talent, always respect the whoever hires you. Again, any input that you could get, I still ask for input. I've been doing this 30 years. I'll still ask people what they think about something I did or something I do with the crowd, to entertain them between the matches and stuff. And how do you think that went over? I thought that was a pretty cool idea I had. What do you think? And you can never learn enough, and you can never gather enough information to be able to keep growing and be better at what you're doing.
Sitting Ringside, a book that you wrote with Guy Evans. What was your process in deciding to write a book?
Well, there really wasn't. I was cleaning my desk about a year and a half ago, and I found a file with all these old, rare, never before seen formats and from the 90s and Nitro, the last Nitro, and I think in the book there's over 200 pages of bonus material, they call it, but for me it's like the treasure troves of WCW that's never been seen before. And so when I found that, I wanted to find a way to get it out there, but I also wanted to find a way to monetize it. I never had any intention of writing like an autobiography, a book about myself. But I did have a podcast, so I found I was okay at telling stories and going back and forth. So Guy reached out when he saw that I had that bonus material, because I put a page of it on the internet just for some ideas. And he said, let's do a scrapbook. And I said, sounds good to me. And when, he started asking me questions and to tell stories, because instead of the bonus material being in the back, the way it was originally going to happen is you'd have a couple of rundowns and, a couple of formats. And then, like whoever was in the main event of that format, or somebody that had just debuted that became a big star, we would go in and talk. I'd give my opinion or my thoughts or my remembrances of that. And about 3 months in, Guy said, yeah, we're doing an autobiography too. And I said, you better be a good writer. and thank God he was the best. And yeah, I did, but I had no intention ever of. People would ask me, when I would be leaving, Impact shows, are you ever going to write a book? And it's nothing I ever took into consideration. I simply didn't think my story was one that people would find interesting. And it turns out, with a good co-writer and some bonus formats, it seems like it is. So God bless Guy for bringing that out in me and bringing it out in this book. So it's something that I'm honored to have done and excited about for people to read. And I'm excited that people are liking it.
What prompted you to keep a lot of those formats on paper? Obviously, like I think there's this conception that people just kind of throw away, let's throw away the script, whatever it is. But like, why did you like keep them after all those years, or even keep them from the first day that you had them?
I have no idea. I'm a little bit of a hoarder, I guess. I don't know. I guess I put them in my briefcase when we were done, and eventually I had a whole briefcase full of stuff, so I stuck it in my desk. It wasn't a conscious decision to say, hey, we're gonna, if I knew in advance what I know now, I wouldn't have thrown away 2 huge hefty bags worth of WCW t-shirts that probably, according to one expert in wrestling memorabilia, probably worth 25 grand a bag. So, we had Captain Mike Rotunda t-shirts. Apparently they go for $5 each, and I had $5,000 each, and I had 3 of them because they're so rare. So I certainly didn't know. My wife wanted me to clean out the garage, and I had no idea what the value of those were going to be. So I regret that, when I think about it. But somehow they got in my desk, and my wife never made me throw anything in my desk out. So luckily I held on to them. It certainly wasn't a conscious decision, like I said, but I'm glad I did.
In the book, you talk about Tony Schiavone and how good of a sense of humor he has. And there was a moment you talk about how he laughed a lot. And it reminded me of a clip from Dark Side of the Ring recently where Haku Ming, however you call him, saw the Shockmaster clip for the first time, and he could not stop laughing. And you talk about how Tony Schiavone could not stop laughing at this moment. From your side of things, what you saw, what was going on backstage or from everyone else's standpoint as this was unfolding? What was going through your mind as the Shockmaster situation went down?
Well, Gary was ring announcing that night, so I was not, but I was there. And I was kind of right there in the back watching everything, from like in the arena, because it was like a section that they had roped off to do Flair for the Gold, and built this construction. And Fred Ottman was supposed to come out with the Star Wars mask. I don't know who came up with that idea anyway. I think I do, but that it's actually was probably better that it all went down the way it did, because it was if it would have been if it would have been real, if people weren't laughing at it, it probably would have been. I think there's a website that they used to have that was like Wrestle Crap or something, like the worst gimmicks of all time. And that would have been the number one, for Fred Ottman, Tugboat. He's been able to take that great that not so great memory and turn it into, making a living on the autograph signing, convention circuit. I've never seen anybody laugh as hard as Tony Schiavone did during that. I literally didn't think they'd be able to come back from the commercial break and he'd be able to talk. Everybody laughed. I mean, except for the talent. Even the talent was laughing, covering their faces. You can see if you go back and watch it. But not, I think Tony was laughing harder than anybody ever saw. It's about akin. I've seen the Ming thing. It's about akin to what happened with Ming. I mean, it's just one of those things. You see it at first, and then you can't believe it's happening, and then he picks it up and puts it back on, and Ole starts talking in the voice, and it's one of those rare things that it's sort of like Jey Uso went viral one time. There was a Bloodline segment on SmackDown, and he couldn't stop laughing, and he was making everybody else laugh. I didn't watch WWE then. I had stopped watching. I saw that segment, and I started DVRing SmackDown, and to this day, the Bloodline is like one of my favorite things to watch in professional wrestling. So it's funny how things happen, but sometimes real life, it may be uncomfortable in the moment, but the one thing I found about this whole journey is after a while, at least for me, any of the negativity or the bad feelings or the craziness goes away in your mind, and you're left with the good parts. And I think that's good. I think that's great, because some people hold on to that negativity, and you know what? That can't help you. You can't change anything. So I think I think it's sort of that. I think but that whole thing, man. I watched the Ming laugh like 40 times. I couldn't get over it. fantastic clip. And you know, and you can't help but laugh along because you know what he's watching. So good question though.
I did want to ask, you mentioned the bloodline. What's your current pro wrestling consumption as far as WWE, AEW, Raw, SmackDown, Dynamite, all that stuff?
I DVR everything. And like during WrestleMania season, when a couple of months leading up to it, I would watch like some SmackDown live, you know, but I was still DVRing it, you know, and then, you know, so if they had like, you know, those 30-minute opening segments with The Rock and Roman Reigns and all that live to kick off the show, I'd turn that on live if I was home. If not, I just come back. You know, if I wasn't home, I DVR it and watch it. But mostly, it's funny. You know, people put up their, you know, what's going on the shows. You know, like a rundown, and I usually use a rundown, one of those rundowns. I find a rundown, a SmackDown, what happened, and I look at it and I decide, okay, this is what I want to watch, and this is what I want. And what I want to watch is mostly the angles and the promos. Not to take anything away from the wrestling, but as a wrestling fan, I've always been especially enamored with angles and promos. You know, the wrestling is cool, but you know, when you're watching on TV and you know, especially Raw, it's 3 hours. That's a long time to watch wrestling. So for instance, last night I actually didn't look through, but what I did do because of the draft, I was interested to see what was going to happen. So I fast forwarded through most of it, but during the draft stuff and some of the promos, I stopped and I rewound and I looked at it, and you know, I got through 3 hours in about 40 minutes, and you know, that's about what it is now. And but I DVR everything. So you know, I'm still a huge wrestling fan. That has not gone away from the age from when I was 11 years old. I still that fan in there. It's just that, you know, it's a big difference watching 1 hour of championship wrestling from Florida to, you know, 25 hours of professional wrestling. So it's a lot to digest.
There are so many talented individuals in pro wrestling now. You mentioned about how there's 25 hours of wrestling on TV, more if you dig deeper, and everyone is so talented. I feel like everyone on these rosters are great wrestlers. They can all talk. They all look great, but some people stand out from others. And in the book, you emphasize just how big of a star Dusty Rhodes was. Tell me, for you, what makes someone different than just being great versus being a star?
Well, you can't fake charisma. You can't fake it. You either have it or you don't. I guess you could work on it if you have some and try to bring more out. But Dusty oozed charisma. You know, I like I said, the first time I ever watched professional wrestling, Dusty Rhodes was the headliner. You know, I grew up in Florida and watched Georgia Championship Wrestling. So Dusty Rhodes was always the main event guy, was always the promo, was always the cool guy that you wanted to be. You wanted to be like, you wanted to wear the T-shirts he was wearing and the robes he was wearing. And you know, it didn't change at all once I met him in a working environment. He's confident. He's funny. That smile just, you know, lights up everybody's face. Or lit up, and you know, that charisma, you know, it just oozes out of him. A lot like Cody. You know, it's funny. I was at Dusty's funeral, and Cody gave the eulogy, and about halfway through the eulogy, I looked at my wife and I said, "He's going to be a star." And I guess I was right. I just wish that it didn't have to be at his funeral, because I wish he was still here. And he's touched so many people in this business. When I had my podcast, I wouldn't even know how many people he's touched in this business. You know, for just to throw out a name out of nowhere, Tyrus. You know, I remember he almost broke down crying when talking about Dusty Rhodes and what influence he was to him in NXT, and when he was called up to the main roster, and as a friend and as a mentor. He's touched so many people's lives, either fans that have grown up that watched him, that have gotten to know him. It's genuine. It's unique, a uniqueness that I don't know that you could say about very many other people, that for so long they've just captivated everybody they work with, everybody they're friends with, everybody that watched them, everybody, you know, everybody was captivated by Dusty Rhodes. And I don't know that there's an answer as to why. It's just that charisma just was absolutely incredible. Probably the most charisma I've ever seen anybody have, and I've seen a lot of charismatic people.
You talk about so much in this book, and I want to be respectful of your time, so we'll wrap things up. But before we go, the book Sitting Ringside Volume 1 by Guy Evans at davidpenzerbook.com. David, before we go, any kind of teases or things that people could look forward to in the book that we haven't discussed yet?
Yeah, just, it should be an interesting to be able to see to hear about the end of the whole company and how I found out about it in the last Nitro and what went down. And, then you could read the last Nitro format, to see, because we were, hooked up with, Ohio, with Vince McMahon doing segments. And so there's some stuff that he did that's in the formats. There's some stuff that weren't in the formats, but it's definitely fascinating, and it's just one guy's view of how everything went down. Like, for example, Charles Robinson's reading the book right now, and I'm interested in getting his view as to what did you see the same way, and what did you see different, and how. I think that's fascinating. So I can only tell from my perspective, but that's all I got. So. I appreciate everybody that has bought it, that's going to buy it. I don't care if you bought it for the formats and the rare stuff, or you bought it for my story. It doesn't offend me at all. But I would appreciate it if you leave feedback on social media or Amazon. I'm at David Penzer on Twitter. I'm also on Facebook. I think it's David Penzer WCW. So if you want to come and join the ride. We don't talk politics. I don't get in arguments with people. We talk wrestling. I'll put up some pictures of me with different celebrities, and a little music here and there because I'm a big live music fan. So it's easy to follow me. You're not going to get blocked. I've only blocked one person, and that was only because they wouldn't stop bothering me. And I was like, I said to the guy, "Look, I've never blocked anybody on Twitter, but if just chill." And and I don't know if he had issues or whatever, but yeah, I'm easy when it comes to that. I don't believe my own crap. So, I just like to talk about what people like, what people don't like, angles, different things that happen on a show that I might like. And that's about it. I will say that I was a little disappointed, just if you want my take on the last week or so of wrestling. One of the reasons I was watching the draft is because I was thinking that Jimmy Uso was going to get drafted to Raw, and that they were going to get the Usos back together. But that didn't happen. They actually put Jay in an alliance with Braun Strowman last night. So I'm anxious to see how that plays out, because Jay's on a hell of a main event run, so to speak, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And so, it's real tempting to want to put those brothers back together and stick them in the tag team division, because they're so good. What I'm hoping for, and we'll see if it happens, is a 6-man tag at maybe at SummerSlam with Solo and Tama Tonga and Jacob Fatu, who's rumored to be in there, against Roman and the Usos. I think that would be wonderful. And the mark in me is like sounding alarms. Please do that. Hunter, my old friend, if you're listening to this podcast, we need that match, and we need those angles leading up to that match, because that's good stuff.
Yeah, they've been doing so well lately. Wrestling's been so good lately. We've been spoiled. I'm terrible at fantasy booking things. Every time I say they should have done this, they do something different, and they were right every time. So, so it's really been good. I can't wait to see how that plays out. But thank you so much again for joining us, everyone. Make sure to go to davidpenzerbook.com. Again, Guy Evans wrote it. For those of you who don't know, Guy Evans is the person who wrote the Nitro book, which, if you read that, was incredible in its detail and its storytelling. And David Penzer's book is just as good. So check that out as well. And follow him at David Penzer on Twitter. David, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Good stuff. I appreciate it. I enjoyed it very much.
Cool. Thank you so much.